Some viewers may find this disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hi my loves, it's Choice and you're watching Choice TV. For today's video, I wanted to get on here and talk about Aaliyah. Aaliyah, as we all know, it marks 24 years since she passed away and she died on that plane crash 24 years ago. And I kind of wanted to go down memory lane because I've seen this video floating around, and it's been floating around for years, of who we all know as Queen Beyonce interviewing Aaliyah.
You're doing another movie this summer, right?
Hopefully things work out. Everything will be rolling.
That's great.
And of course, every time people see this video and they see this clip, you always go to the comments and it's always a bunch of millennials who are very bitter and very irritated because many people haven't really made full peace with the idea of Aaliyah being gone. Yes, the world has moved on and gone on, and that was 24 years ago, but every time you read this comment section, it's always filled with a bunch of millennials who are annoyed because they could just see and feel jealousy within Beyonce. At that point, Beyonce was just a minuscule artist.
But imagine being in one of the highest selling girl groups of all time and being in a situation where you have to interview one of the biggest pop and R&B stars in the world. What's interesting is Aaliyah was literally at the peak in the year 2000 and she was literally making her mainstream crossover. Aaliyah was seen as the future of music. And then of course, Beyonce had a whole archive and a whole vault full of a bunch of singles. Because at that point, Jay-Z had already taken her under his wing. But what's interesting is we never really knew Beyonce was going to be what she is today. And if it wasn't for Aaliyah's passing away, many people speculate, would Beyonce really be Beyonce today? Would Beyonce be where she is now? Would she have stayed in a girl group for her entire career? If Aaliyah wasn't out the way, would Beyonce even exist? And the honest answer is probably not. The 1990s was the era of variety. We had multiple artists in different realms, but back then, if you were a black woman, you kind of had to pick one. You couldn't do rock, R&B, pop, and rap music. You had to pick a lane. Back then, we really only had Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey, the famous Toni Braxton, who famously sold over 10 million pure copies, and then we had Mariah Carey stepping into other realms of hip-hop and even pop music. There weren't a lot of girls that were able to do that, but Aaliyah was one of those people that were able to do that. The only other artist that was lit during Aaliyah's generation who was actually bigger than her was Brandy. Brandy was way more commercially successful than Aaliyah, considering Brandy was a Disney princess, had a hit sitcom and a thriving acting career, and even her own Barbie as a teenager. Brandy was the only one who was commercially successful in a mainstream realm, but nobody else was able to get the numbers and the viewership as Aaliyah. And Aaliyah fit a lot of that mold. And Aaliyah was framed as being the future of music. But of course, we all know how that turned out as time went on.
She needed to die. It needed to happen because it's called the butterfly effect. The butterfly effect is oftentimes defined as something that needs to happen in history in order for change to arise. Same thing can go for things such as 9/11, something that happened 2 weeks after Aaliyah passed away. If it wasn't for 9/11, we wouldn't have things such as the big national homeland security. We wouldn't have security systems that are as prestigious as they are today. We wouldn't have biometric system that makes sure that every time you go to the airport, things are safe and they know exactly who's boarding the plane. Back then, yes, airports were safe, but airports were literally as safe as train stations. Nobody really cared or paid much attention other than just getting on their flight and just keeping it moving. 2,000 people had to pass away for hundreds of millions of people all over the nation to survive. And now we have updated security systems that are completely unbeatable and completely terrorist-proof. In life, joy isn't built off of what we go through with ease. It's built off of what we survive. If it wasn't for bad things happening in life, we wouldn't understand joy. Life doesn't care about what's fair. You don't simply get rewarded with good health and peace and opportunities just for being a good person, because life has to keep spinning and going. Everything happens for a reason and everything is interconnected. In order for things to exist and prevail, sometimes people have to go, and Aaliyah's time was she had to go. Aaliyah passing away led to a whole new renaissance in R&B music. Let's not forget. Let me take you guys back to memory lane and let's talk about all the amazing things that happened after Aaliyah passed away. Although tragic, although leaving a void in the music industry, and although loved and respected by her peers and her family, it led to a whole new legacy and renaissance for R&B girls. Guess who came out right after Aaliyah? Ashanti. We were introduced to 21-year-old Long Island native Ashanti, who literally blew up the charts and completely changed the game forever.
Baby,
I'm not always there when you call, but I'm always on time. And I gave you my all. Now, baby, be mine.
Now, many of you may think I'm insensitive when I say this, but what if Aaliyah's death was necessary in order for that door to be knocked down? Y'all remember, the early 2000s was the era where there were so many R&B girls eating and doing incredible. It wasn't just the 90s anymore. This was the Y2K era that literally defined fashion, hairstyles, beauty, cosmetics, opportunities, and body positivity. Let's be real, anyone that grew up in the 90s would tell you, nobody knew who the hell Ashanti was until Aaliyah passed away. And mind you, Ashanti and Aaliyah are damn near the same age. How we didn't know who Ashanti was? Ashanti was in the industry for a couple years before we even found out about her. She was singing background vocals on Big Pun's album, she was out here doing background vocals for a lot of artists, and she was doing songwriting behind the scenes. How did a lot of us never hear of this beautiful girl who's 21 years old from Long Island with this wonderful artistry? Where did she come from? Her breakout single, Always on Time, was released literally 3 months after Aaliyah passed away in that plane crash. Does that seem like a coincidence to you? Probably not. The industry was just so invested in finding a new princess of R&B, they just couldn't wait to crown somebody else.
Labels were seeking and desperately hoping for a new R&B princess, looking for a girl who had that mainstream appeal, who could be in movies, talk shows, television shows, somebody who was brand friendly but still relatable to a lot of young girls. Ashanti was the sweet, whisper tone girl next door that everybody wanted to be like. Every girl in the early 2000s was obsessed with Ashanti. They wanted to do her hair like her. Hell, some girls wanted those sideburns because they wanted to look just like her. Aaliyah essentially left avoiding music, and when she did, she hit the reset in pop culture right after she passed away. And that led to a lot of doors being slammed open.
Guess who came right after Ashanti? Tweet. Tweet made her big debut with her big major album, Southern Hummingbird. But what's interesting is, Tweet's hit single, Oops, came out 5 months after Aaliyah passed away. What if I told you that song would have never existed had Aaliyah lived? What if I told you that labels would have thought that she wasn't Aaliyah enough? What if I told you that labels would have just simply passed on the song and not pushed the record because they felt as though that, it was too bland and wasn't enough? Missy Elliott helped produce this song. Mind you, Missy Elliott and Timbaland were the main craftsmen when it came to Aaliyah's success. Who's to say Missy Elliott would have moved on to work with other artists if it wasn't for Aaliyah passing away? You see what Missy Elliott created because of Aaliyah? Then we were introduced to the critically acclaimed and super successful Christina Milian at the age of 20 years old. Then her album dropped when she was 21, 5 months after Aaliyah passed away. So when you see her self-titled album, Christina Milian, reach heights of success, when you see this girl literally on Disney Channel singing theme songs for Disney Channel shows.
I'm here recording the theme song for Disney's Kim Possible. The song's called Call Me Baby.
Let's not forget, Aaliyah had a promising career in entertainment. She was making her mainstream crossover once the Y2K era hit. She was in Queen of the Damned. As we all know, she completely bodied her role in Romeo Must Die, and it was a commercial success. And of course, Aaliyah was on track to be in the Matrix films. She was on track to be in multiple films throughout the year. She was even going to play the role as Honey in the movie Honey, but instead it was given to Jessica Alba because she passed away and couldn't take on the role. There were so many things Aaliyah was going to accomplish, and you think to yourself, would these same roles have gone to the same people? And her death essentially made her the blueprint. She was the blueprint. Look at all the symbolism in Aaliyah's music videos. Her music videos had a lot of futuristic edits and a lot of eclectic energy. But when you look at the music videos, you can see that they were trying to frame her as being the future of music. She's responsible for the renaissance of R&B and pop girls. She's responsible for the reason why a lot of R&B and pop girls were able to prevail. Then guess what? We also had NEVAAA. NEVAAA released her big hit single, Don't Mess With My Man, which was a huge hit in the summer of 2002. And then following that, her debut album was released. Then following that, we had Kelly Rowland featuring Nelly on Dilemma. Dilemma was a huge hit and one of the biggest songs of the summer, and it was Kelly's debut, even though it was Nelly's song.
The song is a classic and is well respected to this day. And the success of Dilemma led to her Simply Deep era, her debut album that literally came out several months after her feature on Dilemma. If Aaliyah hadn't passed away, would there have been a lot of focus on a lot of artists going solo? Why were so many artists coming to the forefront? Why were a lot of girls doing pop and R&B at the same time? We also had other artists like JoJo. JoJo came out in the year 2004, and she was heavily inspired by Aaliyah and was even discovered by Aaliyah's uncle, Barry Hankerson. Then, let's also mention this. JoJo was so successful that she was even offered the role of Hannah Montana. She was even in the movie Aquamarine. This girl was huge. And you think for a second, if Aaliyah had not passed away, would Barry Hankerson, who's Aaliyah's uncle, had even invested in JoJo? Would he have even paid her any mind? JoJo was only 13 years old when she made her big debut. Why would anybody pay attention to a 13-year-old? Back then, people felt the same way about Aaliyah. And then fast forward to Beyonce's Crazy in Love era. Beyonce's Crazy in Love era started in 2003 when she released her debut album, Dangerously in Love. What's interesting is, if we hadn't seen Aaliyah pass away, would Jay-Z have gone so hard to try to find a new Aaliyah? You know, we all know that there was a void in music. You know, when Beyonce released her debut album, when she was testing the waters as a solo artist, a lot of her solo singles weren't doing that well. She had a single on the Austin Powers soundtrack before her album came out called Work It Out. A lot of money was invested into it, but it completely flopped and did terrible numbers. On top of that, before Aaliyah passed away, she also had a song with Emil called I Got It. A song that literally no one remembers, and it did terrible. Then she released Crazy in Love, Dangerously in Love, and she became a culture figure. Aaliyah cannot help the fact that she passed away and died, but what's interesting is she cracked the door wide open, and that let other people walk in right after her. People walked in curious, wondering what would be next for them. And would a lot of other artists know or realize their calling if she hadn't passed away? Sometimes I think to myself, what would have happened if, let's say, there was a time machine that existed? What if we can just go back in time and stop someone we cared about from passing away or dying? What if we could just go back in time and say, damn, what if Aaliyah didn't pass away? What if I stopped her from getting on that plane? But you can't stop someone you cared about from passing away, regardless of who it is, because one thing you need to know is, death always finds a way. Death is inevitable, and there are heavy consequences with interfering with the future. Can you imagine an era where Rihanna's Pon de Replay never came out? Pon de Replay, Rihanna's biggest single in 2005, came out, and she had the whole world in shambles because this girl literally could sing, she can dance, she had the crop tops, the slim build, and people just thought that she was just the next big thing in music. Nobody predicted her success now, but can you imagine an era where we didn't have Rihanna? Would Rihanna's reggae vibe even be pushed far? Would she have just been boxed in as a reggae artist if Aaliyah hadn't passed away? You gotta always think about how you're honestly undoing things if you can go back in time and change the fabric of reality. Although Aaliyah's music is timeless, let's be honest, Aaliyah's music would have probably just stunted the growth of R&B and pop music, especially for a lot of the new girls that came out. They would have felt a pressure to emulate that sound and remake it, because labels would have felt, well, you gotta compete with Aaliyah. Aaliyah being gone meant there was nobody to compete with. There was still a standard, but no one to necessarily compete with. They were looking for something fresh and new, and everybody, including Jive, Epic Records, Atlantic, Sony, and many more record labels, were trying to find somebody to fill that, and that's where we eventually came across Ciara, and we had her Goodies era. If Ciara had never dropped her major album Goodies in the early 2000s, do you really think music would have progressed the way it did? Ciara had the early 2000s on lock all the way up into the mid to late 2010s. Let's be real. Ciara having the industry on lock plays a very big role on why music progressed. She created a whole genre within itself with the whole crunk and beat era. Let's not forget one of her biggest cosigns was one of Aaliyah's mentors, Missy Elliott. So what if I told you that you would have to give up Ciara's Goodies era, Ciara's entire eras, in order for Aaliyah to stay? You'd probably be apprehensive because where were you at when Ciara came out? What age were you? Ciara's music came out at a wonderful time and she had all of us on lock throughout the summer in the early 2000s. Either way, if Aaliyah was able to be stopped from going on that plane, something else probably would have took her out anyways, because a new era needed to be born. The era of R&B and pop was at a standstill, and her coming out
led to other miniature versions of her. Other labels were willing to invest and pour money into other young girls, and a lot of these young girls desperately probably needed that chance just to even be seen or get their shine in the industry.
It's just the way the world works. The world isn't built on fairness. The world isn't built on merit, morality, and being a good person. The world is built off of what's next, who's next, and what's going to benefit and help the world keep moving forward. Because if you were to ever go back in a time machine and stop Aaliyah from passing away, who's to say that she would have been able to survive the digital era? There's no guarantee that Aaliyah would have succeeded in the digital era, but you know who the biggest beneficiary is in the digital era? Drake. Drake has literally sampled Aaliyah's work numerous times. He even has music that was never released featured on some of his music. He literally has Aaliyah sampled on so much of his projects. Then he also has Aaliyah's face tatted on his body. If Aaliyah wasn't immortalized after her death and seen as a staple in the blueprint, do you think Drake would have found his calling? Sometimes changing even a little thing, such as even swatting a butterfly, could completely alter the reality that we know now. It could even alter you being born. Keisha Cole, Summer Walker, Janae Aiko, Kalani, Mariah the Scientist, Ariana Grande, the list goes on. Her death created a big boom. Many of the artists that we hear today, like Mariah the Scientist, Summer Walker, Keisha Cole, and many others, all inspired by Aaliyah. Sometimes other people's suffering is our reward. These people walked through that door that Aaliyah left open because that's just what happened after she passed away. She forgot to shut the door behind her. She couldn't shut the door behind her. She was already eating and benefiting off of the industry, but she couldn't really eat and benefit off of the road and the lane that she paved. When we go back and we go listen to Aaliyah's records and we listen to her songs, it's like traveling back in time and going into a time capsule. So we could sometimes delve on nostalgia and dwell on, why did this have to go? Why did this have to go? This sucks. And it's because life has to move forward. Gentrification, necessary. Because without gentrification, a kid probably wouldn't have a magnet school built in their area. Without gentrification, new restaurants and corporations wouldn't come to your neighborhood and community, hiring people in that community. Sometimes things have to completely burn down to the ground in order for things to evolve. It's called evolution. But that was that for this entire video. I hope everybody was able to reflect on what I had to say, and I hope this video has everybody thinking and resonating. If you guys like this series and want to see more series like this and want to see more nostalgic content about things that happened in the 90s, old 90s artists, old trends in the 90s, and other things that happened back in the day that do bring back memories, please feel free to let me know what you want to see next and give me your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. And yeah, that's that. Choice out this bitch.
Will you still love me when I'm no longer young and beautiful? Will you still love me when I'm no longer young and beautiful? Will you still love me when I'm no longer young and beautiful?